Hi everyone, welcome to another Teach Kevin Your Things session. It's so good to be having another session where you guys learn with me. Today I have an amazing teacher who I admire a lot eh, with his work in the Node.js space. So everyone, let's meet Harminder. Hi Harminder,
Hey, hi.
how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome, super glad to have you on the channel on this session. So could you do a quick intro about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Very first, thank you so much for having me. And as you mentioned, my name is Harminder. I live in India, and I created this Node framework called AdonisJS. And I created the framework somewhere in 2015, but I'm working full time on the framework since 2020. That's been like 2 years now. And in this session, we will try to explore the framework and also like build something while we do that.
Awesome. Great. So before we get started in that, like doing that into the session, do you mind just like let's have a chat about what really motivated you to like make something as good as Adonis for the Node ecosystem?
Yeah, sure. So, I started writing code somewhere in 2010, I think, or maybe like 2009. And in my early days, I used to write PHP. I think a lot of people back then started with PHP. And somewhere in 2012, I got introduced to this framework called Laravel, and I think it was like version 3 at that point in time. So I used Laravel for a while for a couple of years. Then I switched jobs and I started working with Node, and there was no framework which was even close to Laravel. All framework was were like very tiny, where you assemble everything by hand. So I was missing all the joy and fun and like the pace that you get when working with Laravel or any fully featured framework. So that was the initial motivation behind building Adonis.js.
That's great. So I also I think back in maybe 2018, I had the same pain where everything in Node.js, you have to piece everything together yourself. So if you use something like Express, you have to come up with a folder structure. And I myself also have like a Laravel background. I really loved the framework back in the day. So I was really, really searching. So I think I stumbled on sales about the same time. And just for the bliss of folder structures being in there, like the ORM and things, it just makes sense to have like this full feature framework. And I think Adonis also do the same thing, and it's just amazing. So great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so you mentioned we'll be doing Adonis. You give me a quick intro on Adonis today. So let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So what I was thinking is to build some sort of a very small API, and the goal is not like to build the entire working application, but the goal is to actually explore the framework
Okay.
by building something small. So like the actual application is going to be really simple, so that we can focus on what Adonis.js can do for you, and basically like touching most of the things that AdonisJS provides, whether it's testing or how do you like validate, how do you interact with the database, how do you store data into the database, basically exploring most of the framework features. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I like it. So you're ready to share your screen at this point?
You sure?
Okay. Okay. Here we are. So let's do this.
All right. Also, we can keep the session interactive. So, as you have mentioned that you work with sales,
Mm-hmm.
so if you have any, curious questions that you want to ask,
Okay.
how would HonestJS do something and why we are doing it that way, so feel free to jump in and ask those questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. So yeah, let's do it. Very first, like you do need Node installed on your computer. And the other thing is you need to have like I would say very basic understanding of TypeScript because AdonisJS applications are written in TypeScript. That's pretty much all you need, and then you can like basically scaffold a new project by running this command that I'm typing right now. So npm init is like like a basic way to create a new application. If you use Yarn, maybe you're used to of writing Yarn create. Then AdonisJS app is the package which creates a new app. And here you can basically type in the folder in which you want to create your application. So I will say polls API and press enter. Now, when we are creating a new application, we will be given the option to select the project structure for which we want to create a new application. So you can choose between API, Web, Slim. API is when you're creating a REST API server and you like mainly want to deal with JSON request. Web is when you want to build a traditional server rendered application. Now, this is not like Vue or React SSR, it's like old school templates. And the final one is Slim, which is like the smallest possible AdonisJS application you can create. So we will go with the API one. The project name will be same as the folder name. And then we can like optionally set up ESLint and Prettier. So let's do that. So meanwhile, this application is getting created. Let me give you a small overview of what exactly we are going to build. So here is a demo polls application that I've created in AdonisJS. And this one is like server rendered. So everything like comes from the server. There is no API. And you can like basically create new polls by giving a title, like what's the poll duration. You can define the options that people can choose, and then you can hit create poll. You can also interact with the polls other people have created. So you just like choose an option, you submit your vote. I have already done that for this poll. And we are going to like create an API for this application. And again, as I mentioned, the goal is not to like build the entire API, but to basically build something that gives us the overview of how AdonisJS do and approach things. And also, I have this like Open API spec for the API that we are going to build. And this spec is basically going to help us write our tests. And I'll show you like how exactly that works. All right, so here we have our application. So let's cd into it. And you can start the AdonisJS server by running this command. That's node.js and the watch flag is to like watch the file system and restart the server anytime you change a file. So let's do that. And here it shows it that the server is running on this port. Let's click. And here we get our JSON response, which says hello world.
Nice.
Cool. Do you have any questions so far?
Nope, I'm actually following along. So,
Cool. Uh, so alongside starting the HTTP server, you can also run tests. So you can say like notice test, and the test will run. It will like we basically scaffold hello world test for you, but you can like remove it and write your actual test. And again, if you like want to watch this, so you can say notice test watch, and now it's watching the file system. Anytime you change any file, it will rerun the tests.
nice. Nice.
All right. Uh, let's close the server and let's have our test running because we will try to approach the application in a TDD way.
Okay.
All right. Uh, Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a few packages that I know we will be using, and then like we can talk about the project structure and how everything works. So let me first grab these packages. AdonisJS Lucid. This is the ORM. Then we have AdonisJS auth to basically authenticate the users. And then I'm going to pull in AdonisJS Lucid Sluggify. That basically help us create slugs for anything, whether like it's a post, so you can create slugs for post. All right, so while these packages are getting installed, let's talk about the project structure a little bit. Now, all of the application routes are stored inside this routes file, which is in the start folder. And let me remove all the comments. You basically import the route module, and then you can define your routes. Like uh, this is like a very simple way to define a route where you write the callback within the routes file. So it's like very similar to the way Express does it. And you can like also create controllers so that you don't have to write all the route handlers within this one single file. So we install those dependencies. Now, let's start by defining some routes. So I will say route.get polls, and I want polls controller to handle this request. And I can create this polls controller by going to my terminal and saying Node.js make controller. And this file has been created now. So go here, you can see it's like a very simple JavaScript class that represents a controller. And over here, we can create our index method, which we have defined here. And if you notice, you can actually like click and go to this file and this method, even though we have like defined the controller name and the method name as a string. And we are able to make this work because I have a VS Code extension installed. So if I go to my extensions, this is the extension that I'm using. It is the official extension that you can also pull in, which gives you this click through navigation for your controllers and also for your templates. Let's close this. And here we have our controller. Now we can like write any code that we want here to basically handle this request. And this is how like HTTP request gets handled in AdonisJS. Like you don't have to do anything else. You define your route. You can bind and you basically like bind that route to a controller. And over here you can handle the request. In Express, you basically like most of your route handlers get REQ and RES as two arguments. AdonisJS doesn't do that. You basically get a request context. So let me uncomment this and define the type for this property. Now this context basically has everything. So if I say context dot, here you can see like we have request, we have response, we also have the route, we have the route parameters, we have an HTTP logger. So everything is like scoped within this context object versus having like different request and response objects. And most of the times you will be like destructuring properties from here. So you can like destructure request and you can do like console.log request.url and you can like basically access the URL then. Any questions so far?
No, cool. It's great. I like it. I can see a bit of similarities, especially in the routes with sales.
Mhm.
It's really nice. We do also have like an extension that helps you do the click through as well. It's cool. I
Cool.
like it.
Cool. So now let's go back to our API spec. So what we are going to do is we will like basically start writing our tests, and as the tests will fail, we will like basically build our application to make our tests pass. So for that, what I'm going to do is I will create a new test. It will be a functional test, and we will call it polls/index. And let's go to this test directory. Let's get rid of this hello world test that we have and open this file. So our very first test has to be like when we visit our endpoint, we should get a collection of polls that exist in the database. So let's say get collection of polls from database. And in our test, we can access an HTTP client. It like comes pre-installed, and you can use this client to make HTTP requests to your server. So I will say client dot get and the URL that we want to visit. I'll say if we want to visit polls, await. Let's do response, and let me mark it async. And from response, we can say assert status. So we want this endpoint to basically return us 200 and then also return uh, some data. But before we do that, let's actually console that. So I will say response.body just to see like what the server is returning right now. Go back to our test, it shows that it is returning us like an empty object. And if I go to our API spec and I open this over here, we expect our server to return an object with two properties called meta and the other one is called data. And data should be an array. Now, instead of hard coding all these assertions within our tests, we can use this API spec file to test our responses. So I will like just set up everything, and if you have any question, just like feel free to ask that.
Definitely.
So I will copy this spec file and create a new file called API spec.yml and paste everything. And this file is in the root of the project. Now we configure the test runner inside this bootstrap file. So over here, uh, inside our assert plugin, I will say open API, schemas, and let me import application from application and that to this YML file. So what we have basically done is this application module basically holds the information about your AdonisJS application. So you can see like which version of the framework you are running. You can like pull up the logger from it. You can also make paths to certain directories like I have done over here. So I'm saying, give me an absolute path from the root of the directory to this file. So this is like basically an helper to make an absolute path. And we have like registered our schema over here so that we can use it inside our tests. So if I go to our test now, I can say response dot assert against API spec. That's all like I have to do. And this method will basically use the schemas that we have registered here. Then it will look at the URL on which we are making the request, and it will validate its response automatically for us. So you don't have to like write any manual assertions. So if I go back to the terminal, here you can see our test is failing because our server is not returning this meta property and also the data property, which we have defined in our spec. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I love it. Really, it just makes testing really simple for APIs,
Mm-hmm.
and also since you're using Open API, I think it's like it's almost universal at this point. Any
Yeah.
API developer would know how to use the spec. It's amazing. I
Mm-hmm.
like it.
Cool. And like the best part is I myself have faced this issue where like we create the initial open API schema, but over time it actually like gets out of sync from our code
Okay.
because the schema is like somewhere else and our application is not enforced to follow the schema. And by having a test relying on the schema, make sure that if our code changes, like if our response changes, they will fail. And if our schema changes, that will also make our test fail. So that's kind of the enforcing nature to keep our schema in sync with our code.
Beautiful.
So now let's say if I like hard code the response. So what happens? So I do that again. Now it tells us, okay, like you have the meta property, but you don't have like the sub properties, which is total, per page, current page. And this is like the response which AdonisJS ORM returns when you paginate results from the database. So instead of like hard coding all these properties, I will like set up the ORM and we will start making database calls and make our test pass. So what I'm going to do is I will configure the Lucid package that we installed earlier. So I will say node.js configure, name of the package. And it tells us like which database I want to use. So I will say PostgreSQL. We'll create this config file, update the environment variables, and install the dependencies that the ORM needs. Now, once the configuration is done, it will tell us to like follow some instructions manually. So let me copy this and then I will explain what exactly this piece of code is. So do that and do this as well. So in AdonisJS, we basically do this thing where we validate our environment variables. And the reason behind that is, let's say if I go to our config database file, here you can see that we are using the environment variable db connection. And this is like a helper way to do it. If you want, you can also write it like this, the standard node way. But when you use the env module, you get like autocomplete. So here you can see, you can pull in the database connection. Now if the database connection is not defined, our application is going to fail. And depending upon where it fails, it may or may not give us a proper error message why it's failing. Maybe, like we will get something, cannot read property undefined from somewhere. And you have no idea why it's failing. But the root of the problem is we don't have this environment variable defined. So once we start validating these environment variables, we actually, uh, I would say like speed up our feedback loop. So if this variable is missing, it's not defined, then we will get the error right away versus having like cryptic error messages somewhere inside our code saying undefined is not available on something. So this file is like basically a way to validate the environment variable. So if I remove this from here, from our .env file, go back, here you can see it says missing value DB connection. And if I define it fine, our test will run again.
Really nice.
All right, so we have done that. And let me update the database variables. So I will use, I will like basically update the username for my Postgres database and use this database called Polls API. Now let me also create this database now. So let's create a new one, Polls API, and open it. So right now we don't have any tables, and we will be using the migrations to create our tables. Let's do that. So I'll say node.js, make migration, and I will call it polls. And so, like what? Let's create our model called polls and also the migration. So this M flag will create the model and migration both. And the migrations are stored inside this folder called database migrations. And over here, you can basically uh, build your table by using this JavaScript API. So I can say table.string, poll should have a title, it should not be null, and the maximum number of characters should be 255. And then our Poll should have a slug, so I'll say slug 200, and it should not be nullable as well. And I think let's have another column that says integer, and it should be the user ID, like the ID of the person who actually created the poll. It should not be nullable. It should be unsigned, and it references the ID column in table users. And right now, like we don't have any migration which creates the users table. You were saying something?
Yes, I like the chaining and how they read. It's nice.
Yeah, so it's basically based off Nix if you have used that. So if I go to Nix.js, now AdonisJS ORM basically uses this under the hood. And all this schema API is part of Nix.js.
Cool.
So this is how you can basically build your tables. And once you have deployed your application, you want to change something inside your database, you can create a new migration for that and just modify or like alter the table. And right now we don't have any migration which creates this users table. So what I'm going to do is I will set up our auth package as well by reusing the same configure command, and that will create the users table migration for us. So I will say I want to use our models for authenticating users, and I want to use let's say session for that. What's going to be the name of the model users? Do we want to create the users table migration? Yes, and it's all done. So here is our users migration as well. And here I'm going to add a new field called full name and label. So let's do that. And the migrations basically run in the order that you see them out here. So the first, the polls migration will run, then the users migration will run. But if you notice, our polls migration rely on the users table because we are basically setting up a foreign key on that. And the time when this migration runs, we don't have any users table. It basically gets created afterwards. So all we have to do is like move this one onto the top, and how I do it is like just rename it. Usually, like I set up my auth package first, so I don't have to do this manual renaming. But for this demo, I just wanted to have have a different flow.
Okay.
So let's run our migrations and see what happens. So I say Node.js migration run, and you can see like we have created the users table, we have created the polls table. Now if I run it again, nothing will happen because these two migrations have already been executed. And if I go back to our database, you can see we have these two tables. So we have polls, we have users. All right. So next thing we need is go to our poll model, and we will be using this model to basically interact with our table, like make all the queries, whether we want to fetch something from the database, whether we want to write to the database. We will be using the model for that. And let's define our title here as well. I will say it's a column. And let's define our user ID. That's the foreign key. We'll move it to the top. What else do we have in our table? Yep, we have a slug. So let's define our slug as well. And now if I go to our polls controller over here, instead of hard coding this, I would say return poll.query.paginate, and I will hard code the page number to be 1 and how many records we want. I'll say 20. So let's go back to our test, and it's passing now because we get the response that we are expecting inside our schema out here. And if you want to manually verify it, you can go to the test and just say response dot dump body. And here you can see like we get meta and we get an empty array because we don't have anything in the database right now. But at least the shape of our data is correct.
That's good.
Now, let's also assert like if we have something in the database, we should get that back. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to like create some dummy polls. So either I can do that, like by manually using the poll model, like doing something like poll create many, and like define multiple objects here. But by doing this, I will like have to come up with a lot of random poll names. So instead of doing that, I will create a model factory. So how we do that is the factories live inside this database factories directory, and I will say factory dot define from which model we are defining the factory. So we import that. Out here, we have access to the faker object, and this is like an object that we pre-install for you from the faker JS library. So here we say the title should be faker dot internet dot I think it has to be lorem. Yep. Dot word. Let's say four, and slug is something that we will auto generate, but for now only do this and export this factory. So we'll say export constant poll factory. And inside our test, now we can just use this factory. So I say poll factory dot create many, and we can like create as many, like random polls we want. So let's create, let's say 40 polls. I will await it. Let's go back to our test, and over here we get an exception. It says that we are trying to create a poll, but we are not defining the user ID foreign key, like basically the user ID of the person who has created these polls. So how I'm going to handle that for now is, uh, you know what? Let's set up the relationships that we need. So I will say public author that's going to have a belongs to relationship on the user model. So what we're doing here is we are using this belongs to decorator and this type from our Lucid package that we installed. So it's basically like part of the ORM. And we are saying that a poll belongs to the user model. So we are like setting up a very simple relationship. And we are also going to do same here. So we will say public polls has many poll. So let's say has many poll. So here we are saying a user can has many polls. That means a user can like create multiple polls. So we have set up this relationship now, and we can do same in our factory as well. So let's create a user factory. Factory dot define user, and where we will say email faker dot internet dot email. Password is going to be faker dot internet dot password. And that's pretty much all we need. And we say relationship unfold full factory. Now, if you can go back to our test, instead of using the poll factory directly, I will use the user factory. So I'll say user factory dot query dot with polls. Let's say 20 dot create. So let me like actually explain what just happened. Instead of creating polls directly, I'm saying first create a user using the user factory, and at the same time create 20 polls and set up the relationship between them automatically, so that we don't have to like create a user separately, then create polls and pass the user ID manually. Basically, making the relationship take care of that.
Mm.
Do you have any questions related to that?
It's really nice how you have this shorthand to do that. So if you have like a relationship, you could just let that take care of the associations. Pretty nice.
Yeah, and our test is still failing because we need this library which hashes the user passwords. So let me install that. And as you can see, like every time we change something, our tests are failing, and it's giving us the feedback what we actually need to do next. So that's done, and our tests are still failing. It's because we are not basically defining the slug property when we are creating our polls.
Okay.
So this is the time when we will actually compute this slug from the title. And for that, AdonisJS has a package called Lucid Slugify. So go to that. In the README, you can like basically find out how you want to use it. We already installed this package earlier, so we just need to like configure it now. So I come here, configure it, and now we can import the Slugify decorator inside our model and put it on top of the column for which we want to generate slug. So I'm saying you like generate a slug from the title property. So here we are saying fields and which strategy we want to use in order to keep this slug unique. So this is like a very important thing. Let's say you have a blog where anyone on the internet can create blog posts and you generate slugs for each blog, basically like for each blog post. Since anyone is allowed to write blog posts, the chances are really high that two people will end up writing a blog with the same title. Let's say someone write like sales 101, the other person comes in, they also write sales 101. In this case, you will have a conflict, like you will have like duplicate slugs. So with the help of these strategies, we make those slugs unique. So the DB increment one, what it does is, if it finds a duplicate slug with the same value, it puts a counter at the end. So if someone already has a blog code, like sorry, a post called sales 101, the other person will get like sales 101 dash 1, the next person will get sales 101 dash 2. So that way we keep the slugs unique.
I like it.
Let's go back to our test, and it's still failing. But right now, from our log statement, we get this meta property. We are also getting our polls. So here it says the poll ID is 10, the user ID is 4. Uh, this is the title. This is the auto-generated slug. So if I scroll to the bottom, uh, the error we are getting right now is our response should not have the user ID property. It should have a votes count property, and it should have a author property. It should have options. So that means we have to do more work in order to get the response that our spec is expecting from us. So let's do that. Let's go back to the spec for a second. Out here, we can see that every poll has an author and it also has options. So like when you're creating a poll, you cannot create it without at least two options. That's required to create a poll. Otherwise, like people cannot vote on that poll. So that means we need a database table and a model to store the poll options. So that is what I'm going to do now. Nowadays, make model. I will call it poll option and create a migration. And over here, we will say table.string. Every option has a title. It should not be null. And every option should have the poll ID as a foreign key. So we'll say integer poll ID. It should be unsigned, should not be nullable. And it references the ID in the polls table. Then we will have an integer that stores the number of votes this particular option has received. So I will say votes count should not be null and it should default to 0. I think that's pretty much all we need. Maybe we should also store the user data who actually voted for this option so we can know which user voted for which option. So also store a foreign key for that. Now let's run our migration to create this table. So I will say migration run. Come back. We have this table now, and we need to actually define these properties on our model as well. So let's do that. A couple of times. I would say it's user ID, should be number, and the poll ID should be number 2. And then we need to like set up the relationship between poll and the options. So I will say every poll has many options. So poll option has many poll option. Uh, Now, anytime like we create a poll, we will also define the options with it. And for our test, we will also update our factories so that we can make all this like work automatically. So I'll copy this. I would say poll option factory. This uses the poll option model, and the title can be this. And votes count will be 0. That's fine automatically. Let's define this relationship options on poll options factory. We go back to our test and we say create a user with 20 polls, and for each poll create 3 options. So we say poll the with options 3. So we are like like basically building this tree where we say first create one user, then for that user create 20 polls, then for each of that poll create 3 options. And again, we are able to like make all this work because we have the relationships in place.
Yeah.
And now from our controller, we will have to like return the poll, but we also have to return the options. And we can do that quite easily by saying preload options. So if we go back to our tests, and it's failing because it says the user ID is not defined. All right, I think that's happening because when we are, I think it's happening from the factory. Yeah, I think because like when we are creating the poll, we are able to like define the poll ID on in the options table from the relationship, but we don't have any relationship between the user and the poll option. So I think we have to define it manually somehow. So let's do this and say this merge, and we have to user ID. That's poll has user ID. Nope, poll doesn't have it. So see how we can get it. Uh, Doing this, let's do console.log poll here. Let's see what we get. Yep, so we don't have any attributes. I think I have to break it down a little bit. Uh, that we don't like get too deep into debugging it. So let's say like create one user. So here we get the user, and then we what we do is We say poll factory dot query dot create many tree. Explain like what exactly I'm doing. Second option for see if this works or not. User ID and I would say user ID. Let's see what happens. Let's get rid of this. And we run our tests. Okay, so that thing worked, I think so.
Okay.
Here we see poll factory merge options 3 options dot merge this, and if we go to our database, let me actually explain what happened because we don't have any direct relationship between the poll option and the user. There is no way for the ORM to find out which uh, user ID to basically pass in next to the option.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm also thinking one more thing, and that is why do we even need the user ID here? Because a poll initially will not have any votes. So if it doesn't have any votes, it should not have any user ID for the person who voted as well.
Okay.
Yeah, do you see like the mistake I did or
Yeah.
no?
So I was okay. User ID, the polls. Okay. Yeah. So I was thinking the user ID definitely was for the user who made the poll.
No, so this is like within the options table, it is for the user who voted for
Okay.
that option.
Oh, the options
So
table. Yeah.
yeah, so let me if I show you visually, and yeah, so this is the poll. This is the user who created the poll. But if
Okay.
I let's say select option two and I submit the vote, now this option has my user ID to show me that I voted on this option.
Okay. Makes sense.
But yeah, but when the poll is initially created, it does not have any votes. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make any sense to have the user ID in this table.
Yeah.
So I
That.
think I kind of messed that up.
Yeah.
So I'm
Definitely.
going to remove it. Yeah, and I'm also going to like remove it from here. And if I go to back to our test, we can like actually get rid of all this stuff. So as our like code was getting complicated, it was an indication that we were not doing something right.
Yeah. True.
So let's remove all this and come back to this. And let me, like roll back all the migration so that we create tables from scratch. So roll back one more time, and now run the migrations. Right now, like we are manually running the migrations. What we can also do is run the migrations every time we run our tests. So if I come here, I can use this hook. So runner hooks are basically the functions that you can define which run before and after all the tests. So what I'm going to do is I'll say test utils is basically a utilities object, and I'm saying pull the database utility out of it and migrate the database every time I run the test. And once the tests are completed, roll it back so that I don't have to do it manually every time.
Nice.
So let's run test again. And let's see what happens. Yeah, so this time it's failing. It says you're not returning the uh,
Vote count.
vote count property, yeah, and you're returning the poll ID property. So we need to do things. Here we have to find this column called votes count. That should be a number. And we have to, let's see what happens now. So if I go to the top, uh, our response should not have user ID. So over here, so what really happening is if I go to the spec and inside our polls object, we don't have any user ID. We just have like the entire user object within a property called author. And by default, when you return a model in the response, all the properties from the model are basically in that response. And if you don't want any property to be part of that response, you can just say serialize as null. That means when you are converting the model to a JSON object, do not put this property into that object. It's like that simple.
Nice.
And similarly, we have to do it here. Like we don't want to enter poll ID with the objects. So it's still failing because we need the author property now. So if I go to my controller, I can say preload author as well. And finally, it says the user should not have this remember me token, which is like an internal property. We should not be leaking in the API. And I know it will still fail because let's see why. Yeah, it says every poll should have a votes count property. Now, in order to pull this off, it's a little bit complex. So what I'm going to do right now is uh, go to our spec and search for votes count and move it for a second. We will like get back to it, but I'm just removing it for now so that we can have our passing test. So, yep, finally it works. All right. So uh, let's do one thing. Remove this call and remove this as well. All right, it's all good now.
Okay.
And now our response is basically, I would say, following the API spec. It's not out of sync. Whatever it's here, the server is returning that. Now, obviously, it took some time because we were like building the entire application one by one and getting the feedback from our test.
Hmm. Cool. So I have this question
Hmm.
before we get too deep into it. So you did serialize as null to ignore
Uh-huh.
some properties that you don't need. So what if in a separate controller we do need that property? How do we account for that in this case?
Yeah. So this is like for doing it globally, that like if you don't want some property every time, for example, in case of user password and this remember me token, I think like no API should ever return it because it's like a personal information that you should not be leaking over API. But if it's about like cherry picking, where you say, okay, for this request I need this, for that request I need something else, what you can do is uh, like store this to a variable. So sorry, it should be polls.
Okay.
Now this is basically an array of uh, the the pagination object, which has like all the poll models. And here you can say polls serialize, and here you can say the properties that you want to cherry pick. So
All
you
right.
can say pick. I think it's yeah. So you can say fields, the one that you need. So if you just need the title, you say I just need the title. If you need the author, you say I just need the author.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, and usually you will be doing this when you're giving client the control to pick specific fields. So let's say you're building an API and you want the clients, which can be like your front end application or your mobile application, users to basically define the fields they want in the response. So it will be like part of the URL, something like this, polls and fields, and they say, okay, I need title, I need author, and then like within the author, I may need like something else,
Mm-hmm.
and like something like author.id because author is an object. That I need like author.email. So what you will have to do is you will have to like basically parse this query string by yourself and convert it into a tree. So you will have to like do that plumbing yourself. But once you have that in place, you can like use that parser anywhere and use its output to give it to this method.
Nice.
That makes sense. We also have like some documentation around it. So if I sort serializing models, and here you go. Yeah, so that tells you like if you want to pick some fields, if you want to omit some fields, if you want to like pick some fields from the main model, then from the relationships, you need like specific fields. So you can like basically have this tree, and of course, like you will have to build this tree yourself by parsing the query string based upon whatever spec or whatever I would say
Yeah,
standards you are following.
cool. So as a follow-up, are you doing this at the database level or just at the ORM level?
Yeah, so the serialization happens at the ORM level. So the database still pulls like so we like bring everything from the database every time, and the serialization only happens when you are like converting your models to uh, JSON responses. And there is a
Yeah.
reason behind that is many time you have like some part of your application which needs access to the data. So maybe you don't want to return the user email address, but you need it for something else. So at least like within your code, you can get that. Like for example, in this
Mm-hmm.
case, I can say polls 0.title. Maybe I don't want to return title in the response, but I need it uh, within my code to compute something else. So we keep both of them decoupled. Again, like if you don't want that, you will have to do a bit of plumbing again,
Yeah.
and you can use the same tree to pass to this like select method. So once you have the tree, you can like call this select method and also select specific columns at the database level as well. So you can say select title, select like whatever and other field as.
Nice.
So yeah,
Cool. Yeah, that's some good options in there. I like it.
cool. So let's return back this. We're also not using this. Yeah, so that's how like we have touched a few things. So we have looked how you can write tests in Adonis.js, and if you are building an API and you have a API spec in your
Mm-hmm.
hand, you can like pretty much use that to drive your tests. We have also looked at how you can like use models, how you can create database tables. Uh, what else do you want me to cover?
Okay, so yeah, I don't think it might apply to the app we have. Okay, maybe it does. Okay, like the policy. Okay, like should I say middleware? Generally speaking, so only maybe logged in users should be able to vote in the poll. So how would we do that? Just for like an
Yeah,
example, though.
yeah. Let's do it as a test again.
Okay.
See how far we can go.
Yeah, sure.
Nowadays, make test. It will be a functional test, and I will store it inside post/create. So this is like pretty much how I organize my test. You don't have to do that. I like create a directory for every resource and then a file for every action.
Mm-hmm.
And here I would say let's allow guests from creating post, not really post. So we don't want anyone who is not logged in from getting a poll. So it should be async. Let's pull in our API client. I'll say client dot post. We also have a helper function. So if you don't want to like hard code URLs within your test, you can say route and give me the route for uh, the the route, which basically is handled by this method. So the route, which is handled by pulse controller and the store method, give me the URL for that. So if you refactor your routes, you don't have to like refactor your tests because it's like looked up by reference.
Nice.
And here I can say const response, and I say response dot assert status should be 401 because we are not logged in when we are making this request. So So here it says we don't have any route, which is handled by this uh, controller method. So let's go. We say route.post, and we say polls. That's going to be post controller dot store. And now let's create this store method. So public async store. So our routes file, and oh, sorry, there should be polls controller. Yep,
Yeah.
works now. And here, like we are expecting 401, but we got 200 from the server. So yeah, I think we have already like configured the auth package. So when we configure the auth package, it creates this auth middleware for us. You can tweak it if you want, but if you don't do that, that's also fine. Which like basically takes care of the authentication. And all we have to do is go to this kernel file where we basically like register all of our middlewares, and I will give it a name, which and here I import the middleware. So let me just write it, then I'll explain you the flow as well. And we go to our routes file, and I say for this specific route, I want to use the auth middleware. So what we are really doing is we have like this one dedicated area where we register all of our middlewares. We can give them a name so that we don't have to like import uh, the actual middleware every time we want to use it. We just like give it a simple small name,
Okay.
and then within our routes file, we can stick that name to any route we want. Also, we have like global middlewares, which are out here, which like runs on every request. In case of authentication, we don't want it to run on every request. We want to, like be specific and manually define the middleware on the routes we want. Now, if I go back to our test, it says, hey, we need the session package because we are relying on the session auth. So
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
let yeah, let me pull that in. And also like quickly configure it. So I said nowadays configure AdonisJS. In the terminal, again, we just validate this environment variable. So env.ts. And if you go back to our test, it works fine because we are getting 401 from the server.
Nice.
And that is like taken care by this particular middleware. Now, how this middleware works is part of the documentation, so you can actually go and see how it's working. Now, let's say we want to allow the user to create the poll when they are logged in. How do we like actually do that? So let's say uh, this test should still fail. So it should be disallow when no title and options are not defined. So we're basically saying like uh, this test should fail when the user is logged in, but we are not defining the poll title and the option. So basically, the validation is failing. And this time, instead of expecting 422, sorry, 401, we expect 422, which is the error code for the validation failure. So if I save it, go back to our test, It gives us 401 because we are not logged in. Now, doing the login is really simple. So all you have to do is you have to say login as, and then give the user object. So um, create a user on the fly by saying await user factory dot create. That's pretty much all you have to do. You create a user and you say, okay, when making this request, log in as that user, and it's only for this specific request.
Mm-hmm.
So if I save, I know it will uh, fail because we just have to define a different driver. So anytime like we are writing test, uh, in order to make sure that the session which is created by our test to be available on the server, we have to like use this memory driver. That's like
Nice.
part of the entire flow, so that we are not writing our sessions into Redis or files or
Mm-hmm.
cookies. We're like putting them into memory and then we like blow off the memory after every test.
Cool. I like it.
Yeah. Now, uh, save it. Okay, we are expecting 422, but we are getting 200 because we are not doing any validation. So
Yeah.
let's do that quickly. Put that in, and I'll say request dot validate schema. Let's pull from the validator. So and here I can say schema dot create. Let's say we want title. That should be schema dot string. Then we need options. That should be schema dot array
Mm-hmm.
members, and each option should be an object. So schema.object, and they all should have like title. So schema, let's save, and let me say payload equal to await. And if I hover over it, you can see the data that we are expecting. We are expecting a title that should be a string. Then we want an array of options, and each array should have an object with a title property. And once the request is validated, like we get static types for it. So if I say payload dot, you can see I can like access the title property, I can access options, I can say 0, and then I can like access the title as well.
Nice.
And this is like pretty much part of the validator. And now our test is passing because every time this validation fails, an exception is raised, which is converted into a 422 response and given back to the client.
Cool.
And if you want to like check the response again, we can say like dump the body. And here you can see like this is the response given back to the client. So it says errors. This is the rule that's failed. This is the field, and this is the message. If you want to customize the messages, you can say uh, the required rule fails on the title, just say enter poll title. And if you come here, you can see we get message as enter poll title. Sorry, like this.
I like it.
So that's pretty much how like validation works. That's how like the auth middleware works.
Nice. Cool. I think we're already at time. There's just so
Mm-hmm.
much interesting aspects to get into. Like I have the AdonisJS docs open up, and I can see
Uh-huh.
things that I like mailer, the events, logger. So cool. Yeah. So one thing I'm interested in though is in the test. I noticed you're using Japa, and we've talked about Japa a while. So I don't. So it's like this in-house built test runner you came up with that
Yeah.
is framework agnostic, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's built into like a fresh scaffold of Adonis by default. So I noticed you use a route helper. So the question is, do the route helper, does it work for just Adonis, or it could also pick up routes in other framework? Because I'm thinking of like, okay, I could be writing my tests in Japa for a sales app. I'm actually going to
Mhm.
test that after we're done here. So is that um, first party to Adonis, the route helper?
Yeah. So that route helper, like indeed, is for Adonis only because
Okay.
Japa like has no idea which
Mm-hmm.
framework you're using, so it doesn't even know how to like build routes. Basically, like build URLs for the routes.
Okay.
But the good thing about Japa is you can like pretty much extend it the way
Oh,
we did it. So,
okay.
uh, so this thing here, this object is basically the test context, and
Mm-hmm.
this is like the documentation for the test context. And over here we have a section which says that you can add custom properties to the context. So what we have done is we have added this macro. So we say test context dot macro route, a function which over here uses the AdonisJS router to make the I would say the URL for you.
Mm,
And
okay.
so this is like the runtime code, but in order to make like TypeScript happy because it has no idea like
Yeah.
what this macro function does, you can like define that function manually on this interface.
Okay.
And this is like pretty much the standard how everyone does it. And TypeScript calls it like module augmentation, where
Mm,
you have some object that you want to extend from outside, like that properties or methods are not part of that object. So you can create an interface of the same name, and you can like put those properties for static intelligence
mm.
on that interface.
Nice, nice. So I
I
could,
think I
yeah.
can, yeah. I was thinking if I can pull up where we have that. So I think it should be in this preset I created for Adonis. So yeah, like we have a preset for Adonis.js, and yeah, so this is where like I have defined that macro. So AdonisJS has this thing called like IOC container, and this is like all the code related to the container. We will not like talk much about it because
Mm-hmm.
it can get like it can like become a topic of its own.
Yeah, sure.
But here I'm saying like when the AdonisJS application runs, this boot method is called, and I'm like pulling off the route module of AdonisJS from the container, and then I'm like defining this macro which uses this method behind the scenes.
Mm.
And in any Adonis.js application, you can like pretty much call this method. So let's say if we go to our routes file, I can come here and I can say make URL. It accepts the route identifier, any params we want to pass to it, and any option, which is like same what I'm doing here.
Mm, nice. That's really useful.
Yeah. So like if you want, you can like create a preset for sales as well,
Yeah.
and
So,
then like anytime the sales application boot, you run the code for that preset, which basically like uh, put these like on-demand runtime properties
yeah.
to the test context.
Okay. So, how do I make Japa aware of those presets, for example? Like,
So this is like going to be a standard package. So you just create it and then you just ask people to install it
oh,
and
nice.
and run it as like plugins if you want. So
Okay.
here we have like the documentation for plugins. Yeah, creating plugins. So yeah, so you can see like how you can create your own plugins.
Yeah. Nice. I got it. Cool. Definitely gonna play with that. So yeah, um, I think Adonis is amazing. Really. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
it's fully featured, and I see the ease with which you could build like an API, and it is robust enough to default to TDD, which is very appealing
Mm-hmm.
because you just get to have like this sanity check that yeah, my application is working per a schema, for example, which is great. Yeah, so since we couldn't cover much because of time constraints, and of course, this could take like 3 hours if you want to do that. So,
Yeah.
where can one go to learn more about Adonis and its ecosystem, so to speak?
Yeah, sure. So if I go to our homepage and Pretty much like on the bottom, you can find links to everything
Yeah.
that can help you like stay up to date with what we are doing. So you can like follow us on Twitter to see what we are doing. Like jump onto Discord if you want to ask questions, and if you have like any issues, you want
Mm-hmm.
help. We recommend like going to GitHub discussions, so because it like becomes a searchable place for others also to come in the future
Mm-hmm.
and see the problem that people had in the past and find the solutions. You can also like subscribe to our newsletter, so we send it out anytime we have like anything exciting to share.
Okay.
This is the VS Code extension that I was using. It does a lot more than what I've like used. So you can like pretty much make controllers within VS Code. You can view all the routes within VS Code. So yeah, this one is really nice. So I say list routes, you can see the routes of the application we have.
Oh, nice. Really, really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, so.
and you can like view the documentation for Japa for Adonis both.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, that's pretty much all. And then we have like this place where we list like all the community packages. So if you think like framework does not have anything, you can come over here and see if someone else has created that. And also, if you have created any package, you can also like submit it over here.
Okay. Cool. I like it. I really, really like it. Okay. So, yeah, where can we find you online?
Uh, sure. So yeah, that's pretty much all I think uh, we were like able to cover over here.
Yeah, sure. So I was asking if probably someone watching the video want to like reach out to
Hmm.
you. Where can they do that? Twitter, LinkedIn? I don't know.
Sure. So you can like reach out to me on Twitter. That's basically the place where I'm usually active.
Okay.
And I can like if you can like see my screen, so
Yeah,
you
sure.
can see the Twitter handle. Apart from that, we can also share it in the description of the video.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Definitely gonna share most of the links you suggested, the resources, the community links, and all, especially also your Twitter profile. Okay. Yeah. So thank you. Really, really. This was like an interesting session. I really learned a lot, like a lot of
Uh-huh.
ideas, and I admire and envy the robustness, especially the testing part. I love it. It's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. It's really, really nice. So thank you for coming on the session. Yeah, thank you. Any like final words for viewers that's going to see this video later? Anything at all?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So like very first, thank you for having me and actually showcase what AdonisJS can do. And again, the goal of the session was not to build the entire API. It was mainly to uh, like make you discover the parts of the framework that you can later go and play more with. And yeah, that's pretty much all. If you like the framework, then please use it. If you have any issues, feel free to jump into Discord or create discussions, and we all will try our best to help you out.
Great. Thank you, Aminda. And yeah, we're good on this session.
Cool. Thank you so much. See you later.